For more, let's go to Washington. Hussein Ibish, senior resident scholar at the Arab Gulf States Institute. Thank you for being with us here on France 24.
Great to be with you, François.
It's been more than 10 days since we had the heads of intelligence services here in Paris. At the time, we were talking up there would be this truce, perhaps. We're still waiting. Why is that?
Well, I think it doesn't offer Hamas what Hamas would want. And they've been very clear. They want an end to the war. They want an agreement that's going to result in a timetable for Israeli withdrawal. They want a lot of prisoners released. None of those things are on the Israeli agenda. The Israelis are willing to go along with the plan that was hatched in Paris by obviously the French, by the Americans, the Qataris, the Egyptians. It offers Hamas at least 40 days of pause in exchange for the release of hostages in stages. First, the remaining civilians, then eventually the soldiers, and finally whatever corpses they have. I think Hamas is looking for more, and I'm not sure ultimately that either Benjamin Netanyahu or Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar really want the war to end. I think they're both finding it politically useful for them.
And how about these interlocutors? Right now, Antony Blinken is in Qatar. What's in their interest?
Well, the Qataris are really playing a very complicated game because for a decade or more, with the approval of Hamas's biggest antagonists, that the United States, Israel, the Palestinian Authority, and Egypt, really sort of were Hamas's biggest patrons. The Hamas external leadership mostly lives in Qatar, it still does. Qatar picked up the bill for the public employees, that is most working people in Gaza, and kept the economy afloat, kept food on the table, and sort of represented Hamas internationally, or allowed Hamas a platform to be heard internationally. Now, since October 7, obviously that looks very different to the rest of the world because Hamas looks very different since the massacres in southern Israel. On the other hand, the Qataris are the natural interlocutor with Hamas. And as long as there are the hostages, and as long as there is a post-conflict stabilization period to be discussed, as long as you want Hamas to buy into a post-conflict Palestinian leadership in Gaza that's not Hamas, but that Hamas won't fight with arms, then Qatar is really the place to do it. They let the Egyptians take a lot of credit, but I do think the Qataris are the main interlocutors with Hamas.
Yeah, we're looking at those images from earlier in the day. Antony Blinken in the company of Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Egypt's in a tough spot right now because they've had their revenues, we heard the news this week, halved from traffic through the Suez Canal. That's because of those Houthi strikes on commercial shipping. Yet the Egyptians seem to be biting their lip for now.
Yeah, no, they are, because they're in a very tough spot. They are kind of dependent on everybody else to restore order, especially the Americans, the Gulf states. They are not in a position to confront the Israelis on what's happening in Gaza, but at the same time, they do want the Israelis to kind of wind up the war. It's very dangerous for them. Not only is their economy completely tanked by Houthi piracy in the region. In fact, the main victim of Houthi piracy in the Red Sea, other than the commercial shipping companies that are being attacked, is Egypt and its economy. Its currency is in complete freefall, and its economy is destroyed. At the same time, you've got the specter of more than 1 million Palestinians crowded into Rafah and Khan Yunis, which is right on the Egyptian border. And many Israeli ministers and other powerful people in this government have said that the Palestinians in Gaza should be removed to Egypt, pushed into Sinai. And there's really a question of the extent to which Gaza is going to be livable. And are the Palestinians going to be able to survive in Gaza after this onslaught? And would they maybe be forced into Egypt, and the Egyptians is forced to take them because what else are they going to do? How are these people going to live? And the Israelis might get their way by sort of eventually forcing the Palestinians in Gaza to flee to Egypt just to survive. And the Egyptians are very, very worried about that because they've had a policy since the early 50s not to allow the Palestinians in Gaza to be displaced into Egypt. But that looks now increasingly like a real possibility.
Are you saying, Hussein Ibish, that the United States would stand idle if Israel sort of forced those Palestinian civilians over the border into Egypt?
If they did it with arms, if they pushed them on pain of death, no, the United States would not stand idle. What I'm talking about is creating a situation where Gaza is uninhabitable, you see. And by blocking reconstruction and by making it impossible for Palestinians to live, they kind of encourage Palestinians to leave. And the first place they could go out of Gaza, the only place they could go other than Israel, which is not possible, would be Egypt. Now, the Egyptians would try to stop that, but I think there are Israelis who are hoping for that outcome. And I think Egypt is kind of counting on the United States and others to prevent that by providing humanitarian aid and by putting a reconstruction process in place that will make Gaza livable after the war in short order so that these people don't seek refuge in Sinai just to get food, just to get a place to stay.
Hussein Ibish, we're going to cross over to Doha now and listen to the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken.